English translation 411th contact, Saturday 28th January 2006, 20:56 hours.
There you are. Be greeted, dear friend. Eva was a little mad that I had to maneuver her out, but that will straighten out.
Thank you for your welcome, and you also be greeted. Ava will not take it hard that she had to leave your workspace. Besides, there is nothing we can do about it.
Exactly, and furthermore, my office is my refuge where I have to do my work and where I can meet and talk to you and everybody else undisturbed.
This is probably a clear statement and will be understandable for Ava.
That is to be assumed, even if she grumbles. But may I ask you 3 things at once, or are you in a hurry?
No, I am not in a hurry. What do you have to ask?
They are actually questions that were put to me, and I could not answer them. But I think that the questions and answers are actually of general interest, so it is the same for me, because I do not know anything about it.
Then there is nothing to prevent me from answering them. So if you want to ask...
Thanks. The first question is about how humans die on Era, because you do not know any more diseases that could cause death. The second question is about the care of humans who are in need of care due to accidents, etc., or in old age. We have never talked about this before, so I myself am not aware of it, and would be grateful for an answer.
In fact, our health care and health hygiene are so highly developed in every respect that we no longer know any diseases in our world. Nevertheless, we must protect ourselves from germs when we come into contact with other humans from other worlds and with the conditions of other worlds. We are generally only immune to all kinds of diseases that existed on our world, but not to diseases of other worlds. So for us, immunizing protective measures are necessary when we enter other worlds, which also applies to the Earth. But this does not cause us any problems, because our medical knowledge has allowed us to protect ourselves against all germs for a very long time. And that brings me to your question. In fact, humans no longer die of any diseases in our country, but usually only as a result of old age or, which unfortunately can also happen, as a result of accidents. Normally, about 94% of all accident injuries can be healed by our medical science and medical practice. But unfortunately, there are also those cases where no medical art of healing can help anymore. If injuries require a longer period of recovery, medical professionals are available to provide all necessary care until the injuries are completely healed. However, these cases are rare, because usually injuries of all kinds can be healed within minutes or hours, including fractures of the bones, as you know from your own experience. If care is necessary, it is not provided in hospitals, which we have not had for a long time, but each injured person is cared for in their own home by specialists. And as far as dying in old age and the state of health of the errands is concerned, it has to be said that such signs of old age, as they are given with the Earth humans, are no longer true with us. Consequently, all humans on our world are in good physical condition up to old age, and there are no complaints of old age. Consequently, they die in old age as a result of old age itself, because the vital functions fail. Thus, except for causes of accidents, no more humans die of diseases in our world, but this only applies directly to Era and to a few races of the Federation, while the majority of them have not yet reached our level in all relations. The average age of U.S. errands is 1,050 years, which is also equal to the earthly years, when speaking in terms of Earth years. The races of our Federation, on the other hand, have average ages between 248 and 793 years.
Aha. Then the Earth humans are still very much at a disadvantage to be accepted into your Federation, if that would be possible at all. The average age of your Federation is probably based on the fact that they have reached this high age through a corresponding evolution of consciousness, through which they have got everything under control, including technical and medical science, etc., through which they have achieved a longer lifespan.
That is correct.
That is it for the first two questions. Thank you. Maybe something else will come to my mind, but just now, the third question. There was someone here this week, and I talked to him about the catastrophe that led to the extinction of the dinosaurs about 65 million years ago. Unfortunately, I know very little about it, just what you have explained to me. Could you tell me more about it? Here I have made some excerpts from old contact reports which say the following. About 65 million years ago, the great cataclysm that wiped out dinosaurs and many other large animals was caused by a world space projectile about 11,000 meters large that slammed into the Earth. Is it really true that only this meteor was to blame for everything?
Basically, yes, at least in the origin, because there were other bad consequences from this one, through which the final catastrophe only came about. Due to the enormous impact, powerful tremors were created on the whole planet, which were triggered by a chain reaction of worldwide earthquakes, in the consequence of which 314 large volcanoes erupted almost simultaneously within a few hours, which were followed by 6 out of 8 further heavy eruptions within a few days. The meteor and the volcanic eruptions spewed so much dust, ash and steam as well as poisonous gases and other substances into the air that most of the larger life on Earth suffocated or perished, and the sun's radiation could not penetrate the Earth's surface. These are other things we have researched by looking back.
That will do, thank you. Which, of course, you are right again. About 65 million years ago, the great catastrophe in which dinosaurs and many other large animals were exterminated was caused by a world space projectile about 11,000 meters in size that slammed into the Earth. Is it really true that only this meteor was to blame for everything? Beside the dinosaurs, many other animal species were also exterminated by the climate change, and of course also countless species of flora. The reason for the worldwide climate change was then found in two enormous natural events. On the one hand, in the fact that several giant meteorites smashed into the Earth, which had wandered through space far away from the asteroid orbit of the asteroid belt for many thousands of years, whereby they moved more and more away from the actual asteroid belt, and finally found their orbit to Earth, which, due to their impact, plunged into a gigantic catastrophe and climate change. From this it follows that several meteorites thundered onto the Earth, and therefore not only one. Where did these things hit, and in which periods of time, and what was the result?
I can give you some more information about that. Already 3 million years earlier, before the dinosaurs were destroyed by the big meteorite of 11,000 meters, that is to say, it was an asteroid from the asteroid belt, like various other lumps that crashed into the Earth in the area of today's Yucatan and created a crater about 180 kilometers in size. It happened at about 330,000 years earlier. At exactly the same place, a first asteroid of about 6,700 meters in size struck, which already caused devastation and shook the Earth, causing many volcanoes to erupt. The first asteroid's fall triggered several huge tsunamis, the largest of which reached a size of 300 meters. However, the second impact of the 11,000-meter-sized asteroid also produced several tsunamis, the most powerful of which reached a height of 490 meters and took its fatal course at around 800 kilometers per hour. Many volcanoes around the world got into turmoil by the impacts and spewed out their glowing and fiery masses. While during both events there were also huge sea quakes and earthquakes, which partly led to big tsunamis again. The volcanic eruptions caused an enormous amount of dust, ash, steam and poisonous gases to enter the atmosphere and, for the most part, suffocated all major life on the Earth, at least that which came under their influence. The enormous volcanic eruptions drove ash clouds into the atmosphere, so that huge areas of the Earth were no longer hit by the sun's rays, and these were laid in twilight or darkness. This led to the fact that practically all plants died, and thus the animal world was robbed of food, at least those who lived on plants. As a result, vast areas became desolate, with the waters receding, further contributing to the catastrophe. But these were actually only the last effects of the two big asteroid collapses in the Yucatan area. Besides this, there were several other space projectiles which were not harmless either. But the ultimate reason for the final extinction of the dinosaurs were the catastrophic effects caused by the large meteorite or asteroid that hit the Earth about 65 million years ago near Yucatan. Of course, the process of dying was not immediate, but lasted for a number of years, depending on how nature and the climate changed. It must be said, however, that even without the two space projectiles, the dinosaurs would have become extinct. Because before the great catastrophe occurred some 65 million years ago, a strong climatic change process had already been taking place for 3 million years, and entire animal populations had already fallen victim to it. All genera and species of dinosaurs were also affected by this, so in the end they had a history of dying for about 3 million years. If they had not died out gradually over time after the great asteroid catastrophe, they would otherwise have died out within the next 500,000 to 600,000 years at the latest.
So the catastrophe began 3 million years earlier, when the climate began to change in such a fashion that
Life once again began to change, and a new evolutionary process began. This affected all dinosaur genera and species in such a manner that they slowly but surely became extinct, as was the case with various other large animals, which were no longer able to cope with the climate and environmental conditions, and also found less and less food.
So, then, the dinosaurs and other large animals did not die by fire rolls caused by the meteoric fall, nor did they die frozen to death by freezing cold or acid rain, etc., as certain scientists claim.
No, it was other deadly combinations that were caused by the various circumstances of global climate and vegetation change, etc.
So, then there was not the same event that I know happened 500 million years before the dinosaurs died, when a catastrophe came upon the Earth, in which many huge volcanoes around the world were extremely active and caused global warming, leading to climate change on a huge scale, and millions of years later, dinosaurs and other giant creatures emerged.
That is correct.
That was my last question, just in terms of dinosaurs. Maybe one more later.
Then I will tell you some upcoming things for the near future which you are interested in. The predictions will be valid until the beginning of April, because we will all be absent until then. For my part, I will be coming back here on the 13th of February, but after that, all of us who are in contact with you will be in the DAL universe for about a month and a half. But listen, I was talking about the snowstorms and roof collapses due to snow loads, which are also occurring today, as in Poland, France, Italy, and Spain, when I said in my last predictions that roof collapses will also occur in countries other than those mentioned, just as the snowstorms will also occur in southern Europe, including the south of Switzerland, where heavy snowfalls will still fall in mid-February in the cantons of Ticino and Valais. This winter will turn out to be the coldest in about 20 years, bringing snowfall until mid-March, which will last into April. I also mentioned that the bird epidemic is present in other states around Turkey, but this is being concealed. But little by little this fact will now become known. whereby Cyprus and Iraq will first of all be talked about, and later also Israel, the Arab states, and Africa, whereby also humans will be infected and die from the poultry. The bird epidemic will soon also be called bird flu, to which it should be added that this epidemic is only a precursor of other epidemics that will occur in the near and distant future, for which overpopulation will bear much of the blame, which was already mentioned years ago with Quetzal and in our conversations. But what needs to be said about the bird epidemic is this. Those in positions of responsibility in governments and certain medical professions and the pharmaceutical industry are creating unnecessary panic, while other circles are ignoring or trivializing everything. Of course, this leads to both insecurity and fear or recklessness among the population. However, the matter must be taken as seriously as it actually is, but not in the context of scaremongering, nor, to the contrary, in the context of recklessness. Basically, the disease is a problem that affects birds and other poultry, but not humans. For the latter, there is a risk of infection and actual disease only when their mucous membranes come into direct contact with pathogens of the birds or other poultry or humans already infected. Furthermore, on the 30th of January in Zurich Wittikon, a joke arises, despite the seriousness of a criminal act, because the police are led by the perpetrators. 61. So it happens that a robbery is carried out at a Credit Suisse bank in the morning hours, and 2 bank employees are locked into the premises. Just a few minutes after the robbery, 100 heavily armed police will secure the surrounding area and wait 7 hours before storming the bank building, which will be pointless because the perpetrators will already fled, as I said, minutes after the robbery, but nobody will notice. Then there will be late protests in the Islamic world, as well as riots, murders, assaults, violence, and arson in relation to Nordic embassies, because, which happened for the first time in September 2005 in Denmark and other European countries, including Switzerland, Islam and its believers have been insulted and religious feelings hurt in newspapers by obscene cartoons concerning the Prophet Muhammad. The late reaction is partly from regimes that are Islamic and hostile to the West, and partly from fundamentalist, Islamist fanatics and terrorists who stir up hatred of the Western world, and in this respect incite the faithful by means of deliberate manipulation, which unfortunately will also lead to a number of deaths.
Apparently, according to the book of Salman Rushdie, who also severely insulted the Prophet, and thus the believers in Islam, the non-Islamic world has still not understood that Muhammad, together with Allah, enjoys the highest form of worship in Islam, and must not be insulted. In Islam, different and stricter forms and rules apply in this respect than in all other religions on the earth. The believers in Islam take their religion and their Prophet as well as Allah and the Quran much more seriously than is the case with all other religions and their sects. If the religion, the Prophet, Allah or the Quran are insulted or defiled in any form, this is also related to the faith and thus also personally, because the Islamic believers are much more deeply rooted with all their faith than is the case with Christians or the believers of any other religion. For this reason, no comparisons can be made between Islam and the other religions, because in Islam, the religion, the Prophet, as well as Allah and the Quran are holy and untouchable and must in no wise be defiled, which is not the case with the other religions in this form, because everything is not seen in the strict framework, as is the case with Islam. Islam should therefore be treated with due respect, because the majority of Muslim people are deeply attached to their religion. So it is a slander and insult when something is directed against religion, personal faith, the Prophet, the Quran, or Allah in a disastrous wise. But if this is done nevertheless, then the religious freedom of belief, which is so highly praised in the Christian world, is trampled underfoot, which says that every person can freely adhere to and live a religious belief, with all the values associated with it. And that is related to all believers of all religions, that is, not only with regard to Islam. But exactly that does not happen when people's faith and their religious values are blasphemously mutilated and trampled into the dirt, which has nothing more to do with logical criticism of religion and its mistakes as well as of faith, which is very well permitted in a correct and rational wise. And if outside Islam, Christianity and its sects and other religions tolerate that their religious values of any kind are made fun of without contradiction by filthiness, denigration, smearing caricatures and scurrilousness, etc., without refusing to do so, as is usually the case, then that is their beer cup of tea alone. And it is then also this beer from which it emerges how seriously or indifferently the botched religion and faith and its values are really taken by the faithful, that everything is nothing more than appearance, lies and deception. But it is certainly not the beer of Islam and its believers, because the believers in Islam stand up for their faith and their religious values, by which of course not the fanatical extremist Islamist terrorists are meant, who by their murderous actions even bring their own sisters and brothers in faith into disrepute and discredit. It must also be said that no one has the right to curse, insult, sideline, discriminate against, persecute or murder believers of any religion, etc. Every believer is a human being like every unbeliever, a human being who must be seen, treated and honored as such, and who must be shown tolerance. And to discriminate against or even criminalize, persecute and blanket human beings, or whole peoples due to their faith, with war, murder and burning, as unfortunately creatures in lowliness do, such as the U.S. President Bush as well as his followers, fellow howlers, butt lickers and allies of various states, is beneath all human dignity and beneath all right. In a logical wise, religions and sects as such and religious or sectarian beliefs, as well as religious and sectarian heresies, can be criticized and disassembled. But the rule is always that a human's religious faith and the values it contains must remain inviolable. Thus, no human has the right to condemn, harass or allow malice to be visited upon another human for the sake of his or her faith and the values they find or believe they find in it, etc. And when newspapers denigrate and mutilate the religious values of believers by means of obscene caricatures, then this has nothing to do with freedom of the press, but only with punishable shamefulness, scribbling, as well as mockery and denigration of faith towards believers. But if, as you say, there is rioting, assaults, violence, murder, and arson in the Islamic countries with regard to the filthy cartoons, then that too is an injustice that must not be tolerated. And this is also true when fundamentalist and Islamist fanatics and terrorists, as well as certain regimes hostile to the West, incite and drive those masses of Islamists who are unstable and suggestible and willing victims towards controlled acts of gayvault, to use, with all the coercive means that are at one's disposal, physical, psychical, mental, and consciousness-based powers, abilities, and skills, in order to carry out and carry through tremendous actions and deeds. And aggression. It is these unstable and influenceable humans, who are lacking in independence, who then exercise the terror suggested to them and spread murder and manslaughter as well as riots, heated up shouting of protest and gayvault, etc. And these are not only believers in Islam, but also Christians, Jews, Hindus, and all kinds of their sects. All this is not acceptable, because to fight back does not mean to use gayvault, but to settle everything by rationality and word. Something that all rational humans and those who are devoted to the virtues do, no matter whether they are people of Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, or Buddhism, or any other religious communities, etc. So, the insurgents and terrorists in Islam are not the rational ones, but the irrational, unstable, and influenceable ones. But unfortunately, they are powerful in the minority because they can be controlled by violent regimes or by terrorists, fanatics, fundamentalists and extremists, etc. The majority of Muslim women and Muslim men are fundamentally peaceful and averse to all violence, as is also the case with the majority of those of other faiths or infidels. And therefore the majority of them, must not be held responsible for the evil and crimes committed by the minority of those who are seduced to violence by instability and suggestive influence. And what I would like to say is that insult, disfigurement, revenge, retaliation, murder, jealousy, hatred, arson, war, gay vault, and terror are never a means and a way of understanding, peace, freedom, equality, harmony, and problem-solving.
These are good words, but keep listening. The aforementioned event is also the time when the Swiss population is misled by the Federal Audit Commission with regard to the U.S. torture flights through Swiss airspace, with the publicly untrue claim that such flights from the USA did not take place. The effective truth, however, looks different, because various torture flights through Swiss airspace have actually taken place via the USA, even if this is vehemently denied, and not only by the U.S. government and the U.S. intelligence services, which deny everything about the truth. Switzerland is partly very much oriented towards the U.S. America and does not want to spoil it with this one because, in a certain wise, certain people are dependent on the U.S., which not only affects the population but also the economy and politics. But that the USA denies everything is part of their strategy, which refers to all their criminal secret machinations. Thus, for example, U.S. America also conceals the fact that Guantanamo is not its only torture prison, which falls directly under its administration, because in fact, similar U.S. torture facilities exist in other countries, such as in Afghanistan at the Bagram base, where several hundred prisoners have been tortured for years. The criminal conditions there far exceed those at Guantanamo. Right at the end of January and the beginning of February, a second snow and cold spell breaks over Russia, southern and eastern Europe, with the temperature in Moscow and the surrounding area, for example, once again being around 30 degrees below zero. Also in the Ukraine, Poland, and the Czech Republic, severe cold breaks in, causing the death of about 800 humans in the Ukraine alone. In addition, unusually heavy snow loads will continue to cause a large number of roofs of buildings to collapse because huge masses of snow are falling, which will lead to catastrophic conditions, especially in German Bavaria. Later, in some places in Switzerland, roof collapses will also occur, but these will be relatively minor if comparisons are made with other countries. In Northern Europe, on the other hand, flooding will occur at the same time because the frozen ground is unable to absorb the rain and melt water. It must be said, however, that this year there will be a long winter with lots of snow and ice, which, as I said, will last into the month of April with snow, because at the beginning of March comes the third wave with snow, ice, and cold, whereby also in Switzerland, especially in German and French-speaking Switzerland and in southern and northern Germany, there will still be a lot of snow, which will also cause traffic chaos in some places and even make it necessary to stop public transport. As a result of the coming snowmelt and the rain in spring, major floods and high water will then occur, causing much damage and disaster. When the first snowfalls in Europe come to an end, the northeastern USA will fall into a snow chaos, causing a breakdown of the energy supply in some places. Contrary to the snow chaos, the island of Leyte in the Philippines sinks in weeks of rain, followed by a medium earthquake on the 17th of February. Due to the rain masses, part of an irresponsibly deforested mountain is transformed into a huge mudslide, which then slides away via the earthquake. The village of Guinsaugon is completely buried under meter-thick masses of mud and buries about 2,000 humans underneath it. A series of landslides will later occur in Indonesia as well and claim human lives. There, too, weeks of rain will soften the ground of the mountain slopes until they finally slide down. On the other hand, at the time of the landslides on Leyte in East Africa, there is an unusually severe drought, which leads to a general lack of water, through which people as well as animals will die of thirst. Then, in the first morning hours of February 3rd, a ferry accident occurs in the Red Sea, in which an Egyptian ferry will sink within minutes, killing about 1,000 of the 1,400 humans on board. On the same day, the northeast of Japan is hit by several strong earthquakes, varying between magnitude 5 and 6. In Iraq, where 2 Germans are again kidnapped, the ultimatum of the kidnappers expires uselessly because the German government does not respond to the demand, which leads to a long suffering of the 2 kidnapped. Furthermore, there will be mass panic in Manila during a TV show where large prizes will be handed out. The panic will claim around 100 lives. Then in the first days of February, the IAEA Nuclear Commission decides to refer the matter of Iran to the World Security Council with regard to uranium enrichment and the nuclear debacle, which will release the radical extremist Ahmadinejad from all contractual obligations with the IAEA, and shortly thereafter allow uranium enrichment to begin, and also threatens that Iran will also withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. This, in addition to his repeated denials of the Holocaust, etc. Then video pictures will become known, which were already made about 2 years ago, and show British soldiers who get hold of young Iraqis, drag them away and mistreat them badly with beatings and kicks. Especially through these 3 events. The things about Iran and the violation of the religious feelings of the Muslim people by reprehensible caricatures of various European newspapers regarding the Prophet Muhammad, as well as through the video of the mistreatment of Iraqi youth, the political world situation, which had calmed down a little bit by the restraint of the warmonger George W. Bush during the last months of 2005, is again plunged into a dangerous and worldwide crisis, which may have very bad consequences. Malicious and irrational, as well as irresponsible warmongers in France and Germany, will align with U.S. President Bush and threaten military incursion into Iran. Then another word must be said about the bird flu virus, because it will now appear in Africa as well as in Europe, with the first reports from Africa coming from Nigeria in the second week of February. Then reports from Europe will start to alarm people, first from Italy, Bulgaria, Romania, and Greece, then also from Hungary, England, Slovenia, Austria, Germany, France, Denmark, and Poland, and so on. At the same time, when the H5N1 epidemic becomes official in Northern Europe, where it has been in existence for half a year, a new river poisoning is taking place in China, as it will also be in Bosnia towards the end of February, where around 18 tons of cooling oil will flow into the Neretva River from an electricity plant near Jablanica. In the north of India, there is a further earthquake with a magnitude of 5.8.
Let me ask you this. I mean about Northern Europe. You said months ago that the disease had already been introduced by wild birds in Northern Europe, but had not been transmitted to domestic poultry. And it is probably appropriate that we should lock up our poultry under cover again, is it not?
That is correct, because during our investigations we found wild fowl infected with the bird disease virus H5N1 in 3 different places in Northern Europe. These were not only migratory birds that we found in different areas, but also those that were wintering, like swans, etc., and which are now spreading the disease. In addition, there are also infected migratory birds which are now flying back into Europe. As in Asia, mammals throughout Europe will be endangered by the epidemic and will fall ill and die from it, such as pigs, cats, foxes, martens, polecats, and dogs. Birds of prey and scavengers are also endangered by the bird epidemic. And that you put your poultry back in the barn and do not let them out in the open anymore should really be considered by you. The date for this is already set for the 10th of February and then for an indefinite period of time, because from this time on, the migration of birds from Africa to the north must also be reckoned with for Switzerland, and thus also with the bird epidemic, which will then first be introduced by Germany and France.
We will, of course, do that. It will also be the case that the authorities will once again make it compulsory for poultry to be kept indoors. We will, of course, keep to the date you mentioned.
That will be so. Then I will now continue with the predictions that have not yet been discussed. The next thing to mention is that it is finally becoming public knowledge that the USA deliberately denies all evidence of climate change and global warming or the greenhouse effect, and forbids scientists to make their findings and the effective truth public. The USA also continues to deny that it uses torture prisons worldwide through the CIA to torture kidnapped humans from all over the world in order to force confessions from them. It is also denied, of course, that Swiss airspace is used for the corresponding air transport. In particular, this refers to a jet-registered N379P. With regard to Iraq, something new and extraordinary can be said, because after mid-February, new comprehensive acts of terrorism will appear, in the sense that mosques will be demolished. As a result, the Shiite shrine, the Golden Mosque in Samarra, is also severely damaged by bomb attacks. This is a mosque in which two deceased imams lie, Ali al-Hadi and Hassan al-Askari, although the Askari shrine in particular is considered a particularly large sanctuary for the Shiites. The Golden Dome is destroyed as well as many other parts of the mosque. These new acts of terrorists, radical, misguided Islamists, are aimed at inciting the two major religious groups in Iraq, the Shiites and Sunnis, against each other in such a form that a civil war is to result. Unfortunately, the terrorist acts of the insurgents and Al-Qaeda, who are responsible for these acts, will also result in evil demonstrations and hundreds of deaths, as well as hatred and destruction of a larger number of other mosques. The origin of the whole thing lies with U.S. America, which invaded Iraq with war and caused all the terror by bringing terror into the country itself through the military invasion. Despite the murderous dictatorship of Saddam Hussein, there was largely an acceptable order in the state, which was completely destroyed by the autocratic war waged by the USA. It also turns out that in England the largest money theft of all time to date is taking place, because after the 20th of February, a money depository is robbed, whereby the criminals get hold of around 55 million English pounds. Shortly afterwards, the roof of a market hall in Moscow collapses due to heavy snowfall, resulting in the loss of around 60 lives. After this event, an earthquake measuring 7.8 on the Richter scale will occur in Africa, in Mozambique, near the border with Zimbabwe. The tremors will continue to affect neighboring countries, with South Africa also still affected. Another earthquake occurs on the 28th of February in southern Iran with a magnitude of 6.3. A series of further earthquakes in Iran occurs towards the end of March, ultimately destroying or seriously affecting some 100 villages. Another series of quakes will take place in the area of the International Court of Justice, or the International War Tribunal, where the Serbian war criminal Milan Babic is imprisoned, as he will end his inglorious life by suicide in the first week of March. That will also be the time when an unusual event will become apparent, namely that in northern Hesse in Germany, a farmer fed a deceased acquaintance to pigs. This is followed by irresponsible stupidity on the part of the Swiss Federal Council, which changes its mind with regard to a ban on keeping fighting dogs, rejects the good intentions, and does not pass a necessary law, but instead passes the matter on to the cantons, which should simply issue stricter measures on keeping dogs. Also, the ban in Welschland, which was first issued, is lifted again. But the majority of the National Council and the Council of States will not agree with this irrational action, because they will start a wrangling against the Federal Council in order to realize the elaboration of a fighting dog ban after all. By the decision of the Federal Council, human lives can still be endangered by attack dogs, which corresponds to an unparalleled irresponsibility. In Texas in the USA, big forest fires will rage, which will cause great destruction and unfortunately also claim human lives. Then it happens that in Afghanistan, Taliban groups will again become very active and will carry out new terror and murder foreigners. The next event worth mentioning will be on the 11th of March, when the former Serb leader, war criminal and genocide activist Slobodan Milosevic will die in the prison of the War Crimes Tribunal in Holland from a heart attack and will therefore no longer be held accountable for his criminal actions. His many misguided followers will claim that Milosevic was murdered, but this is not true, for his death will be due to heart failure because he suffers from heart problems. Shortly afterwards, Israel will once again take on something that goes against all the law, with Israeli forces invading the West Bank and storming the large prison in Jericho to get hold of the Palestinian extremist leader and murderer Ahmed Sadat. At about the same time, a seaquake of magnitude 6.9 occurs in the Banda Sea, in the east coast of Indonesia, causing a small tsunami, which naturally leads to fear and terror among the population in the affected areas. Furthermore, in France, a law on protection against dismissal for young job starters is suspended, which leads to weeks of protest demonstrations as well as riots, street battles, rampages, and destruction. This, while the UN is creating a new Human Rights Council, which is supposed to have its seat in Geneva, but which some states, such as the USA, do not agree with, which is not considered exceptional in the case of the USA, because it continues to commit human rights violations, although this is constantly denied. And the fact that the USA disregards human rights will be proven again in Iraq in mid-March, when a major offensive against insurgents and terrorists of Al-Qaeda takes place near the city of Samarra by the U.S. forces. This attack must be called particularly criminal, because at this time the Sunnis and Shiites make a political effort to cooperate in order to form a unified government, which is not in the interests of the U.S. rulers, because they want to continue to exercise power in Iraq and control and use the Iraqi resources for themselves. Then, as an extraordinary event, on the 19th of March in Moscow, a subway tunnel collapses, burying an underground train, but all the people inside can be saved. During the same period, Australia is hit by a severe cyclone, which will reach about 300 kilometers per hour and cause enormous devastation and destruction in Queensland. This will be followed by another one, which will reach about 200 kilometers per hour and hit the northwest coast of Australia towards the end of March, but will not cause any serious damage. Then it will become noticeable that the U.S. military has been indiscriminately killing civilians in Iraq for a long time, and even women and children are not spared. As usual, however, the U.S. will deny this, even though there is evidence of it. From the 20th of March onwards, a series of earthquakes will again occur, for example in Algeria with a magnitude of 5.9, but also in India, Iran and Pakistan, as well as in the canton of Neuchâtel in Switzerland. In addition to a series of explosive volcanic earthquakes in the Philippines, which will occur in connection with renewed activity of the most active Philippine volcano Bulusan, which will produce a huge ash eruption. During the same period, a whole series of landslides will cause a lot of destruction in Indonesia and also claim human lives. On the 24th of March, a serious explosion occurs in Mulhouse, France, in a chemistry college, which claims human lives and injures. In addition, an extremely unusual thing happens in New Zealand, where an armless 32-year-old man, who is not in the possession of a driving license, is driving a car at a speed of over 120 kilometers per hour and is being stopped by the police. He steers the vehicle with one foot while he uses the other to operate the brake and gas pedal. In Argentina, heavy rainstorms will trigger a whole series of landslides and cause enormous damage. On the 27th of March, a severe tornado storm will sweep over northern Germany, causing great destruction, with Hamburg and the surrounding area particularly affected. Unfortunately, the storm will also claim some lives. On the following day, 28th March, the south of Japan will be shaken by a quake with a magnitude of 6.4, which will have effects beyond the capital, Tokyo. Then another shipping accident will occur due to the capsizing of an excursion boat off the coast of Bahrain, in which a large number of people will lose their lives. Then it turns out that the Zurich Public Prosecutor's Office is finally taking steps to take action against the entire former board of directors of Ser Group, who are accused of fraud and economic crime. So that is my prediction. The next one I will give you in April. In the future, however, I will only mention really extraordinary things, so the predictions will not be as extensive as they are now.
All right, my friend. We do not have to archive all the world events either. Absolutely extraordinary things are enough.
We think so too.
So be it then. This means that the contact reports will contain more pure discussion material than just predictions and newspaper reports, etc.
That is correct. It also saves us a lot of work that we have to do for such predictions. In addition, we have also made clarifications regarding the effectiveness of the predictions, namely that they do not bear any fruit whatsoever with the terrestrial human beings because the whole thing is simply accepted and no change in any form is affected.
I guess that is right. Thoughts about everything are certainly only given to all those humans who are connected with Figu as members, friends or acquaintances, etc. The majority of all other humans, however, do not care, or care very little, about the worldwide events made known through predictions. So it is certainly true that you are only predicting very extraordinary events, which in their unusualness fall outside of all unusual daily events.
You have expressed that well. This is exactly the meaning of my words. But now, my friend, it is time again for me to do my chores, which is why I must go. Farewell, and until the 13th of February, so I will not come here this time on the 3rd of February.
Then take care and goodbye.